The biblical principle of private property is evident from Genesis to Revelation. The eighth commandment alone, "Thou shalt not steal," presupposes private ownership and the authority of the owner to share, give away, or sell his property voluntarily. There can be no such thing as theft if there is no such thing as private property. God owns everything, but He allows us to be stewards of His creation. This automatically rules out any act of government to restrict, take away, or redistribute your land, house, vehicles, guns, etc. The direct taxation of property, including income, should be avoided since it implies that the government is the rightful owner. If you have to pay continuous fees for things in your possession, you are not an owner. You are a renter to the government. This is tyrannical and idolatrous of the government since it is overstepping its biblical function and setting itself up as God. The only property taxes you find in Scripture are the tithes and offerings that went to the Levitical priesthood. Priests and worshippers were the ones in charge of giving to the poor and needy in the community, not the civil magistrates. The Bible does not give us specific answers on how civil rulers should collect taxes or how much to collect, but we can safely presume that the percentage should not exceed the tithe of the priesthood, and direct taxation should be avoided. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 4 through 22, the Israelites wanted a king like the pagan nations instead of a godly king. God warned them that this king would be a tyrant who would enslave them, expand wars, redistribute wealth, and demand a 10% tax on their property. All of these things were contrary to God's law, but He would allow the king to reign as judgment against the Israelites. Heavy taxation and confiscation of property are always signs of judgment. And if a 10% tax is too much, then the U.S. government has clearly exceeded its biblical limits. Ron Paul is a firm defender of private property. He agrees with the Bible that every worker should enjoy the fruits of their labor and any possessions they may inherit. He wants to repeal the federal income tax and abolish the IRS. There are other options for funding the federal government, such as those permitted by the Constitution. Paul has been called the taxpayer's best friend. He has never voted for a tax increase, and he never will. He has introduced numerous bills to Congress that would completely overhaul the federal government tax code. He agrees with the Bible that heavy taxation is a judgment for rejecting God as king, and he frequently uses the example of 1 Samuel 8 in his speeches. Paul's presidential opponents may say they want to eliminate the income tax, but they usually want to replace it with another tax in order to maintain the same revenue. This is counterproductive to Paul, as he wants to repeal the income tax and replace it with nothing. A properly limited government would not need the revenues supplied by the income tax. Spending is the primary problem in Washington, and Paul is the only Republican candidate serious about reducing the size and scope of government.